For any new parent, a baby's sleep can feel like this huge, unsolvable mystery, right? But what if all those patterns, the long nights, the short naps, the whole shebang, were actually trying to tell us a story? Well, today we're going to dive into some really fascinating new research that suggests a baby's early sleep might hold some subtle but important clues about their development down the road.
So let's just start with that big idea right there. What if the way a baby sleeps could give us even a tiny glimpse into their future developmental journey? That is exactly the question that scientists are exploring, and believe me, what they're starting to find is pretty incredible.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get into why researchers are so focused on infant sleep in the first place. Then we'll look at the massive studies behind these findings. After that, we'll unpack the specific clues they found at 6 months and then again at 12 months. And finally, and this is probably the most important part, we're going to talk about what this all actually means.
So why the intense focus on baby sleep? I mean, isn't it just about them recharging their little batteries? Well, it turns out, for an infant, sleep is so much more than just rest. It's a time of major construction happening inside the brain.
Yeah, because while that baby looks so peaceful and still, their brain is anything but quiet. It is buzzing with activity, working overtime, literally forging the critical pathways and connections for their future. And that makes sleep this incredibly valuable window for researchers to kind of peek inside and see how that development is going.
Now, if you want to find clues that are actually reliable, you can't just look at a handful of kids. You need to go big. You need big data. And we're about to look at two huge, long-term studies that did just that. They followed thousands of children for years, giving us a really powerful data set to work with.
So, the discoveries we're talking about today come from these two giants, the Barwan infant study in Australia and the Candle study right here in the US. Look at those numbers. Each one followed over 1,000 families for years. It's that incredible scale and long-term commitment that makes their findings so significant.
So, what exactly were they looking for? Well, it pretty much boils down to these 4 key things. How many hours a baby slept at night and how many hours during the day. Pretty straightforward. Same with night wakings, how many times they woke up. But that last one, sleep latency, remember that term. It's a really key one. It's simply the amount of time it takes for a baby to actually fall asleep after being put down.
All right, let's get into the good stuff. The first major finding from all this research, and this one focuses specifically on what the data was showing when these babies were just 6 months old.
So out of all those different things they were measuring, it was pretty interesting. Only one of them really stood out at that 6-month mark. And it was this: the total amount of time an infant slept through the night.
And that one key finding brings us to this number, 22%. So what in the world does 22% have to do with anything?
Well, here's the connection they found. For every extra hour of sleep a 6-month-old got during the night, there was an association with 22% lower odds of a later autism diagnosis. Now, notice I'm really hitting that word association. It's super important, and we are definitely going to circle back to it.
Okay, but here's where things get really interesting. Because as the kids got older, the story changed. By the time they hit their first birthday, the key sleep clue, well, it was something else entirely.
Yup, at 12 months, it wasn't about how long they slept anymore. Instead, the data started pointing to that other thing we talked about, sleep latency. Again, that's just how long it took for the baby to drift off to sleep.
And this is where what parents were noticing becomes really telling. You can see here that caregivers of children who were later diagnosed with autism were almost 4 times more likely to say their child had a very serious sleep problem at that 1-year mark compared to the other families.
And that parent observation leads us to our next key number from the 12-month data, 7.7%. So what's this one about? Get this, a 25% increase in the time it took to fall asleep, which really only works out to be about an extra 4.5 minutes, was linked to a 7.7% higher odds of a later autism diagnosis. It sounds like a tiny difference, but across a group this massive, it was a statistically significant link.
Okay, we've looked at the numbers, we've seen the data, but now we get to the absolute most important part of this entire explainer. Putting it all into perspective, what does this research really, truly mean for parents and for kids?
Let's be crystal clear about this, because this is everything. This research shows a correlation. It does not, under any circumstances, show causation. Having shorter sleep or taking a little longer to fall asleep does not cause autism. It just means these are two things that scientists observed happening at the same time in a large group. That is the single most important takeaway here.
I absolutely love this way of thinking about it. These sleep patterns, they're like one tiny piece of an incredibly complex, 1,000-piece puzzle of a child's development. They are not the whole picture, not even close, and they are definitely not a crystal ball.
So let's just sum it all up right here. First, these are clues for researchers to follow, not diagnostic checklists for parents to worry about. Second, and say it with me, sleep patterns do not cause autism. Third, every single child's development is this unique mix of countless different factors. And finally, the whole goal of this kind of research is simply to understand development better, so we can find ways to provide earlier and more effective support to the kids and families who might need it.
And that really leaves us with this final thought. Instead of seeing these clues as something to worry about, what if we see them as a sign of incredible progress? They represent a step toward a future where we just understand that developmental journey a little bit better so that we can build a more supportive and understanding world for every single child.